back in Isaiah 38 and 39, it really starts to make a change in chapter 40 a good bit, but there's a couple of things here in 38 and 39 that I wanted to talk to you about and share with you, because these are things that even we have to deal with and struggle with and address. It's oftentimes what we see, the pattern, and it's unfortunate that it sometimes takes this, but it's the times of great hardship really that drive God's people to really seek after Him, right? I'm no different in that. It's you as when things are kind of smooth and going well, and there's not much really to worry about. Sometimes my attentiveness to God and prayer and all those things, it kind of diminishes a little bit. Anybody else like that, or is that just me? I think that's everybody in some way or another. So God will often use these times of hardship and crisis to drive us to Him. Israel, when we're looking here in Isaiah, Israel had experienced this national threat from the Assyrians in 36 and 37, and it drove Hezekiah to seek after God. He delivered them in this miraculous way. He sent the Assyrian army running back home in defeat. In Isaiah 38, King Hezekiah, he also has a personal crisis, and there's some indication that these events in 38 actually happened before the Assyrians are actually gone. But he has this personal crisis, and it also drives him to seek after God, seek his face. In Isaiah 38, why did it do that? It says, "In those days Hezekiah became mortally ill. And so Isaiah the prophet, son of Amoz, came to him and said to him, Thus says Adonai, put your house in order, for you are dying and will not live." And I just want to stop there for a second. How would you like to hear that message? Not today. You're right about that. How a person, how a nation responds to such moments reveals our hearts in a lot of ways, reveals the kind of decline that we may be in. The more the decline that we have, the more that we don't recognize the moment, the more that we don't acknowledge anything that's happening in our life as being from God. The more that, or maybe if we don't even wonder about it at all, if we just blow it off and ignore what God is trying to do to get our attention, the more we try to just power through the problem and keep doing what we're doing before. Y'all, have we reacted that way before? When we just kind of pretend we don't notice when God is doing something and saying something and creating some kind of crisis to get us to seek after Him. The less response that we have when He tries to get our attention, the less repentance that we have, the smaller the change that we're going to make, the actual more decline that our faith is demonstrating. And a person or a nation that's in decline, if there isn't any response, if there isn't any crying out to God, if there's no indication of repentance, or maybe it's only a short-lived kind of pattern, or something happens and we're changing for a couple of days, but then we're going right back to normal. Y'all remember how it was after 9/11 when that happened? How church attendance, what did church attendance do? Did it spike up pretty significantly? How long did that last? A few weeks, a couple of months, and then it kind of went right back to normal. And when you see that kind of pattern, when you get something like this, put your house in order, for you are dying and will not live. If you don't respond to that, that shows you how far down the spiral you've slid. Put your house in order. That's not a very pleasant message to hear from God. But thankfully, Hezekiah, he responded well. He responded and went to the right place again, as he did with the taunts and the threats from the king of Assyria. He responded appropriately to a point. He is told to put his house in order, to make your arrangements essentially. Get those things done ahead of time. Make your wishes known. As a hospice chaplain, I tell people that all the time. It's not a very pleasant conversation because people. He's told essentially that he's going to die. And we all pretend that we know that on some level, right? We all know that's coming. But most of us like to assume, well, it's not going to be today. We like to assume it's not going to be tomorrow. We like to pretend as if we know that put your house in order for you're going to die. That means sometime way off in the future, right? That's how we like to be. But again, I've seen a lot of people trying to deal with that very same kind of message, deal with a diagnosis where they are told, you're not going to make it out of this. And, one of the requirements for a hospice diagnosis is that you're told that you have 6 months or less. And nobody likes to hear that. That's essentially what Hezekiah got. He got told, you're not going to make it out of this. And he responded the right way. His crisis drove him to God. And his crisis was like this, to remind God of their relationship, of their walk. He says, then Hezekiah turned his face to the wall, try to remove all those distractions, all those things that, all those voices and people that are around him trying to tell him, hey, it's okay, don't worry about it. He turned his face to the wall and prayed to Adonai. He said, please, Adonai, remember how I have walked before you in truth and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your eyes. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. He is reminding God of the kind of life that he sought to live. That halakha in truth, in emet, with all his heart. That doesn't mean he was perfect. But he's like, this is the kind of life I tried to live. This is the way I tried to lead this nation and this people. To remind God of the good that he had done. And he had done a lot of good. When you look in 2 Chronicles of the description of his life, there's a lot of parallels between this section in Isaiah. You'll find it almost word for word in 2 Kings and also in 2 Chronicles. But it tells us about some of the good that he had done in 2 Chronicles. It says, Hezekiah became king when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. And in the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the house of Adonai and repaired them. So right off the bat, he's realizing the priorities. Goes on, he says, he brought in the Kohanim and the Levites and assembled them into the eastern square. Then he said to them, listen to me, Levites. Sanctify yourselves and sanctify the house of Adonai, the God of your fathers, and remove the defilement out of the holy place. Now, why did he have to say that? Because there was defilement in the house of the Lord. And who had let it be there? Maybe the previous kings, but ultimately, who's supposed to be responsible for that? Isn't it the priests and the Levites? Supposed to not let that stuff be in there. So he is indicating a change in policy. So the Kohanim went into the inner part of the house of Adonai to purify it. They brought out to the courtyard of the house of Adonai every impure thing that they found in the temple of Adonai. Then the Levites received it and carried it out to the Kidron Valley. So they cleansed themselves and the temple, and they took all that stuff that didn't belong in there, and they threw it out into essentially the trash. The king insisted upon that. Hezekiah was leading them in that, and the change in policy. He even restored the full participation in the feast of Passover. So he is leading in worship. It says in the chapter 30, it says Hezekiah sent word to all Israel and Judah. So even out to those that were left in the northern kingdom. He wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the house of Adonai at Jerusalem to keep the Passover for Adonai, the God of Israel. There had been a lot of hurt feelings and division from the population in the north, the population that had experienced so much destruction at Assyria's hand. He's saying, guys, you need to come down here. You need to worship with us in Jerusalem. When you're reading in 2 Chronicles, they actually had to do it in the second month. There's the first Passover in the first month of the year. They did it on the 14th day in the second month, as they were allowed to do, and it was because there actually weren't enough priests who had consecrated themselves to be able to conduct it. So he sends word again throughout all the land. They came, and many of those that came from Ephraim, from Manasseh, from those northern tribes, they hadn't really prepared or consecrated themselves for the Passover either. They were not really prepared, but there was mercy that was shown in all of this. Hezekiah allowed them to participate. He prayed for them. In verse 18 it says, although a great multitude of the people, many of them from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not purified themselves, they still ate the Passover lamb, contrary to what is written. So there's mercy. He desires what more than sacrifice? He desires mercy. The ability to come back in and eat the Passover, participate in what they should have been doing all along. That feels like me sometimes. There is mercy. Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, may Adonai, who is good, atone for every one who prepares his heart to seek Adonai, the God of his fathers, even though he is not pure according to the rules of the sanctuary. And Adonai heard Hezekiah and healed the people. That should give us a lot of hope about how God treats those who are truly seeking after him. And it's following Hezekiah's leadership. This is all within the good that he had done. When they went home, the people took his guide, took his leadership. They went home and smashed the pillars and the Asherah poles, all the high places, the false altars, all throughout the land. They were willing to follow his leadership. Hezekiah and some of the good that he had done even reinforced the priesthood. 2 Chronicles 31 says, then Hezekiah reestablished the divisions of the Kohanim and the Levites together with their divisions. So it sounds like it had somewhat fallen apart. Each of the Kohanim and the Levites according to his service for burnt offerings, peace offerings, to minister, to praise, or to sing praises in the gates of the courts of Adonai. It says that Hezekiah also built the storehouses of the temple. Because once he reinstituted all this stuff, they started bringing all these gifts and offerings, and they was just piling up in various places. So then Hezekiah ordered them to prepare storerooms in the house of Adonai, and they prepared them. So there was a resurgence of true worship. There was a resurgence of keeping the feasts. There was a resurgence in people wanting to seek after God, all following after Hezekiah's leadership. We know that he built the tunnel that was bringing water inside the walls of Jerusalem during the siege, right? The Hezekiah's tunnel that you can still walk through. Some of you may have done it. Chapter 29 sums up his heart, and you back up a little bit, sums up his heart like this. He says, now it is in my heart to make a covenant with Adonai, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger may turn away from us. Because he knew that they had broken it. They knew that they were out of covenant. So he wants to reestablish that covenant, that relationship. And it goes on in chapter 31 to sum it up like this. Thus Hezekiah did throughout all Judah. He did what was good, right, and true before Adonai his God. Every work he undertook in the service of the house of God and in the Torah and the mitzvot to seek his God, he did wholeheartedly and succeeded. How many of y'all would like that written about you? Uh-huh. What did I say? Oh, did I? Thank you for catching that. Make a covenant with Adonai. Yeah, that's kind of important. Slightly. But he did this wholeheartedly. And to have that written about him. I mean, that's what it sounds like to hear something like a well done, my good and faithful servant, right? That's what that sounds like. But how did God define what was good? Right? He says he's serving the house of God in the Torah and in the mitzvot to seek his God. Right? He did what was good, right, and true, all as defined by his word. But it's something important to notice. You don't want to forget. Even with all this good stuff, all this stuff that's said about Hezekiah, did he still get sick? Yeah. Was he still going to die at some point? Yeah. So none of us, really, none of God's people are exempt from that, even when we live a good life. We are not exempt from the trouble and the sickness and the death that's in this world, but in it all, can we testify to him and his faithfulness? Yeah, we can. Our response in those moments reveals the kind of faith that we have, and it's through these types of moments, the ones that threaten a lot of times our comfort and the status quo, that we often see the most powerful moves of God. You know, God can and sometimes and often does respond to prayer, to humility, to repentance and submission. He does that in powerful ways. You and I both, I mean, if we're all honest, we both wish we could predict how and when that's going to happen. We sure wish we could predict that it would happen more often. But I do believe when his people are struggling, when they're in that mode of crisis and we turn to him, whether he responds with a miracle or not, is he still going to hear our prayer and our cries to him? Yes, he is. Is he going to see the cries from his people? Yes. He may not always respond the way that we would like, but he is always good. And the kind of faith that he wants to see in us is the kind of faith that will turn to him and trust him even when it doesn't happen the way we'd like. You look at how God directs Isaiah. Back in Isaiah 38, it says, Then it came to pass, the word of Adonai came to Isaiah, saying, Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus says Adonai, the God of your father David, I have heard your prayer, and I have seen your tears. But behold, I will add 15 years to your life. I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city. So that's one of the reasons why we think this is a conversation that's happening actually before Assyria is gone. But he learned that his illness, and it must have been pretty serious, was not going to end his life. He knew that he was going to live another 15 years. He knew the city, the nation, was going to experience deliverance. And he even gets to see a sign, a miracle, a confirmation in the shadow turning back on the stairs. It says, Now this will be the sign to you from Adonai, that Adonai will do this word he has spoken. Behold, I will cause the shadow on the stairs which went down with the sun on the sundial of Ahaz to turn back 10 steps. So the sun's shadow went back 10 steps on the sundial on which it had gone down. Now, I have no explanation for the mechanics of how that works. A lot of people try to figure it out and do all the details. Okay, was it just for him, or was it for the whole planet that kind of reversed course a little bit? We don't have an answer for that. But I mean, that would be an impressive thing. That goes against the norm of nature and how things operate. But what you see in Hezekiah, both personally and nationally, God provided a miraculous deliverance. And those are great times, great moments, great things that we long for, that we want to see happen more and more. But what we have to understand as God's people, that didn't mean that Hezekiah and the nation was suddenly off the hook and in the clear for everything that's coming next. You'd hope that Hezekiah's response after hearing that God was going to extend his life by 15 years, you'd hope that it was going to be good. But apparently, when you look in 2 Chronicles, this high moment of deliverance, such a powerful move of God, actually taught him the wrong lesson, or he responded in the wrong way. And this is a danger for us in many ways. 2 Chronicles 32 says, "In those days Hezekiah became deathly ill, but he prayed to Adonai, who responded to him and gave him a sign." We just read about that in Isaiah. But Hezekiah did not respond according to the favor, the grace that was done to him. His heart became haughty, and so the wrath came upon him and upon Judah and Jerusalem. We are not always out of danger, even when we see God do great things among us. Many times, even after great victories, we can be our own worst enemy. Think a little bit too highly of ourselves. That happens to Hezekiah, and in some ways, a nation can do the same. Many times the enemy, after a great victory, the enemy will approach in those times, and he'll change his tactics of how he wants to go after you. Not long after his recovery, a new challenge presented itself to Hezekiah in chapter 39 that demonstrated that he did not respond accordingly to the favor that was done to him. And chapter 39 is proof. His haughty heart was revealed. And it's that danger for us, for our nation as well. It says, back in 39, it says, "At that time, Merodach-Baladan, son of King Baladan of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and had recovered." That sounds innocent enough, doesn't it? Babylon sends this envoy to Hezekiah to rejoice that he had recovered from whatever this sickness was. "We're so happy for you, Hezekiah. That's wonderful." Now, what would you think would make a place like Babylon pay attention to, in their minds, Babylon's mind, a hole-in-the-wall kind of place like Jerusalem? What would make them pay attention to Hezekiah? How did they find out about it? Well, I think they were concerned, or they were interested, because they had heard how someone had finally managed to defeat Assyria, the reigning superpower of the day. Babylon was already under their control. Babylon had been defeated by Assyria already. And Babylon wanted to be the one to rise up out of it and be the new power. They wanted to see, okay, how'd you beat them? The word of the champion being beat got around, and this underdog in the eyes of the world somehow took him down, and they wanted to find out what happened. And what we need to understand, that when God intervenes in our lives, when he provides a victory for us, that doesn't mean the enemy always runs off and hides. Sometimes that means that they are alerted, and they're going to come and investigate and say, what is God doing among them? What is he doing in their lives? What is he doing in your life? Hezekiah's sickness was an excuse for them to reach out Because do you really think Babylon cared all that much about Hezekiah and his health and his recovery? No, they didn't care. They were looking for an opening. They were looking for advice. They were looking for a way in. They were probing Judah's defenses, engaging their reactions. They wanted to know how they did it. How do y'all feel about that? Does it disturb you? Does it kind of bother you to think that's how the enemy operates? That when we have a great move of God, even a victory of God, that somehow that makes him pay even more attention to you and what's going on? When you consider all the good things that he has done in your life, when you consider about all the things that he has done even for this fellowship in the last year, what restoration has experienced in the last year, there was a lot of great things last year, right? There's a lot of new people that have been finding us, that faces that we've been seeing that we love to have. We got this place in a miraculous way, and how God arranged that, how God provided a Torah scroll for us just in time, and everything falling in line for the fall feast. Y'all remember what that was like? That was something. And it's safe to assume, we should assume, that the enemy is noticed. We should assume that the enemy has noticed. And at some point, he's going to come knocking on our door, just like Babylon did to Judah. And we have to wonder, how is he going to approach us? We have to be mindful of how that works. Because I don't think he likes the fact of what's happening here. Do you? I don't think he likes that at all. When you think about our nation, does it seem like he's been knocking on America's door for a while? Slightly? Again, it's how we respond to these moments that reveals our hearts, as it did with Hezekiah. He became haughty, right? He became proud. He became overconfident in things. And he responded in the wrong way to this moment. When they came and they sent a letter and presented a gift, it says, now Hezekiah was pleased. Boy, that tickled him to death, as the phrase used to be, right? He was pleased with them. So he showed them his treasure house, the silver and the gold, the spices and the precious oil, and his whole armory, and everything that was found in his treasuries. There was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Now talk about haughty and not responding to the favor and the grace shown to him. Does that sound like a good idea to you, to do all that? He had witnessed, the rescue of Jerusalem. He had seen the shadow move back. He knew that he had these 15 years of life. He was guaranteed that. Well, I know I've got 15 years. And it's understood that it's in these 15 years that he had a son named Manasseh. Y'all remember him? Was he a good guy or a bad guy? He was one of the absolute worst. But he had a son named Manasseh during these 15 years, because we read about Manasseh that he was 12 years old when he became king. So that means he had him about 3 years after this conversation. And so Hezekiah seems to be thinking, well, I'm pretty good. I know I've got these 15 years. I know I'm set, that I've got this. I'm essentially invincible. I am not going to die for another 15 years, so I can see what happens. And Babylon sends this letter, sends this envoy, sends these gifts, pretending to be his friend. Hezekiah is essentially flattered. And he took all of this, hook, line, and sinker, all this special attention. He was feeling so good about himself, his situation, that he assumed that he would always be on top. He essentially took in and welcomed the enemy. He showed the enemy all that God had given, all that God had provided, all of his blessings. He had essentially an open door policy, holding nothing back, no secrets, no nothing. He showed them everything. And that's not a good idea, to show the enemy everything that you've got. How we respond, how a nation responds that's in decline, that thinks it's invincible, that feels no reason to conceal the blessing that God has provided for them. That is not a good idea. Sure, it's sometimes it's hard to recognize your enemy when they hide, when they conceal their identity in those nice words, those fancy clothes. And Hezekiah, he just seems to be showing off. Doesn't it feel like that? That he's just showing off what he has and his wealth and all that stuff. He is showing off, and Babylon is watching and looking, and Babylon is ticking everything off. It's like, oh, that's nice. Ooh, I like that. I want some of that. They're taking inventory of everything that he's got, of the blessing that God had provided his people. And in Hezekiah, it says he shows him their whole armory, right? All of their weapons, all of their military, all of that kind of stuff. He shows them. It's like he's basically telling them and showing them how to bypass his security cameras, and giving them all of their passwords to all of their backdoors things, right? He is showing them all of this. And those kind of feelings can come to us easily after a great move and a miracle of God. When God does something, when he brings us up to that high point on that mountain, we see something powerful happen, it's like, man, that was wonderful. We can't be beat. And that's when the enemy says, well, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way to try to tear you down. And so we have to be wary of those kind of things. Because everything that we have, he takes them, he shows them everything. Did it really belong to Hezekiah? Was that really his stuff? No. Yeah, it's God's stuff. Everything that we have is not really ours, it's his. We are merely stewards of it. He has given us great things, not for our glory, but for his. He has given us great things. He's given us the Torah scroll and things like that. Those are all great and wonderful, but they're for his glory, not for ours. Again, this could easily be me. This could easily be any of us as acting just like him. We may be more vulnerable than we realize, even after a great victory of God. Because all of those great victories can be lost. We don't have this place. We don't have the Torah scroll. We don't have all of these great people here, so we can show off and tell everybody how great we are. Again, we need to focus it on him and direct things toward him. Yes, we can testify about his goodness. Yes, we boast in his victories. We don't hide or conceal or shy away from his blessing. But somehow or another, Hezekiah, he crossed a line. And from God getting the glory to receiving the glory for himself. And he didn't see through the flattery. He didn't see through their praise. He received it. He didn't recognize his enemy when they visited him. And when you think about our nation, America, when you think about a nation in decline, Hezekiah's reaction reminds me a lot of how we've been as a nation in the last few decades. Following all the aftermath of World War II, would you ever consider the national attitude of America as haughty and prideful? Would y'all think of that? After World War II, did we think pretty highly of ourselves? Slightly. I mean, we're America, right? We're the best. We're the superpower because of, we long thought of ourselves as invincible to the point that no one can match us, no one can threaten us. And he has greatly blessed this nation, because of that desire, that request at the very founding of the nation to be in covenant with God. But we have so forgotten that as a people and what that means. Our education system is purposely, hiding all of that. stuff from the generations that come. So it's as if God has no real part or place in our founding. And so if he is not responsible for our blessing, then who is? Well, we are. If he's not responsible, then we're responsible for that ourselves. We're so smart, we're so much better, so we feel no reason to give credit for our victories, our accomplishments, our technologies to anybody but our own ingenuity. And that's dangerous for a nation, for a people, for a fellowship. And when we are thinking like that, we make bad decisions. And when we assume that we are unbeatable, that nothing can tear us down, that our economy is too big, our military is too strong, invincibility, when you're thinking like that is invincibility, we say things like, well, our economy is so strong, we can outsource everything, right? We can have total free trade, move all of our production, all of our manufacturing, all of our textiles. We can put all that stuff overseas and actually produce very little here because we cannot be shaken. We'll always be able to get our stuff. That kind of thinking puts it all out there. Let's open up the market to countries like China to make that cheap stuff. And if they make a requirement that they have to have total access to all of our designs, all of our intellectual property, well, we should just give it to them. Show them everything. Give it over. They'll never be able to reach our level. They'll never be able to match us. They'll never be a real threat to us. So we can show them those top secret things. We can give them access to our communication systems, our power grid, because, we're America, right? Are we doing any of that stuff? Yes. Is it smart? No. It's not smart at all. Because they would praise us, they would be welcome us, everybody will be our friend, but God may not be pleased with all that stuff. When you look at this situation, when you look at how God responded to Hezekiah, he sent Isaiah. Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah and asked him, so, what were those guys doing? What did these men come and say? Where did they come from? Why did they come to you? Hezekiah replied, They have come to me from a far country, from Babylon. They're way away from us. They're no real threat to us. They're over there in Babylon. Then he asked, what have they seen in your house? What did you show them? Hezekiah said, they have seen everything in my house. There is nothing among my treasuries that I did not show them. He almost sounds proud of himself. He's got to get ready for something. Can you picture Isaiah's reaction here? Some of the best memes that are out there are about that face of disappointment, and I looked up a few of those. I mean, I can see Isaiah standing there like this, like, really? Like this kid. Have y'all seen these before? Even Woody, gets into this. And starship captains are like, oh, man, what did you just do? I can see that is so totally Isaiah's reaction to this moment. Because unfortunately, there are consequences for Hezekiah and his nation. It says, then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of Adonai Tzavaot. Behold, the days are coming when everything in your house, which your fathers have stored up to this day, will be carried to that far-off place that you're not worried about. Carried off to Babylon, and nothing will be left. Everything you showed those people, they're going to want. They're going to figure out a way to plan and come and take it. They're going to take it back to Babylon as a prize. So all those centuries of blessing that God has provided, all those items made by the Israelites, some of them in the desert under Moses' direction, you, Hezekiah, are responsible for them taking those things. All those things that you've been building all this time is going to be gone. And you're going to lose even more than just things. It says, moreover, some of your descendants who will issue from you, whom you will father, will be taken away and will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So some of the people, some of his own descendants, maybe it might be his grandchildren or his great-grandchildren, he doesn't know. They're going to suffer because Hezekiah's haughty spirit and desire for approval. They're going to become eunuchs in Babylon, unable to continue and pass on that royal line. People like that we read about, like Daniel. People like as we best know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Right? Those guys were taken off to Babylon and made eunuchs in the kingdom of Babylon. And the hard part that we have to come to terms with is this, is that we are more like Hezekiah than we realize. Our leaders, especially, are more like Hezekiah than we'd like to realize in one major sense. As long as it's not happening to me in my day, I'm not too worried about it. They don't really care all that much about the future so long as they're getting theirs today. Because sometimes we consider God slow in keeping his promises, right? Peter talks about that. God is not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. He is patient with you, right? What's the difference? He's wanting all to come to repentance, right? He doesn't want anyone to perish, but all to come to repentance. Hezekiah was thinking God's slow. He says, Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of Adonai which you have spoken is good. For he thought, for there will be shalom and security in my days. So he believed it. He understood that God was right and just in pronouncing the sentence, but his selfishness was revealed. At least it's not going to happen on my watch. That's someday off in the future. I don't have to worry about it in these last 15 golden years of my life. Sure, my children, my nation is going to tank and be defeated by Babylon, but you know, that's their problem. I'm not going to be around. It's not going to happen in my day. God's reckoning is beyond my lifetime. You know, isn't that how we hear our politicians talking about problems today? National debt, all those different kind of things. You know, it's how many presidents act. It was like, I'm going to make an executive order, but it's going to go into effect the year or so after I'm out of office, right? That's a 2030 agenda, a 2050 agenda. We're going to put all these things, we're going to start setting all these things up now. And our problem, one of our struggles is we don't really know where we are on this timeline. Is the day of reckoning in the future, a few generations down the road? Or was that kind of warning spoken to America maybe a few generations in the past? And we're the descendants that will see this modern equivalent of Babylon taking us down. Where are we on that timeline? Do you know? I don't. What does it feel like we're at? If you were to take a guess, are we closer to that generation that's going to experience it? It sure feels that way. Sure seems that way. One thing I can say for sure, whether it is in the future or whether it is in our day, we as God's people cannot continue living in our comfort and doing, the bare minimum with life. We've got to start acting and living as if the time is short. We rejoice in all of those victories. We celebrate and testify to God's goodness and all the things that he is doing in our lives, not for our own benefit, but for his name's sake. But we've got to be mindful that even in his victories, even in his moments, that we can still be vulnerable to the enemy, that the enemy is still moving and working and planning. We've got to seek to be that faithful remnant that walk in his ways and are like the faithful servants who are doing his will, even if he is delaying for a time, even if the master has gone off on a journey and we don't know when he's coming back. Let these times drive us to God. And are we willing to be that kind of people? Are we willing to believe in Messiah Yeshua, even when all these systems and all these things look like they're about to collapse, when there are wars and rumors of wars? Are we going to panic like the rest, or not be alarmed and have a peace that passes all understanding? Because we know that our future is secure with Him. What kind of people are we going to be? Because we're on that timeline somewhere. Our nation is a lot like that in many ways. We've seen many great victories. But where are we? We need to be the kind of people, the kind that are found faithful when He comes. Walking the way of life that He has called us to, that He has awakened us to. And if that means, hearing the call to the invitation to Passover and things like that, we've heard that call. And so we want to respond and follow His leadership in all of this, and trust that our future is very much in His hand, celebrating His victories, being mindful of the times and what the enemy is trying to do.